No one in the grand Donovan mansion ever looked twice at the maid. She was quiet, polite, and always moved like a shadow. There when needed, gone when not. But to Alexander Donovan, a once powerful millionaire now watching his empire crumble, she became the one person he couldn't stop thinking about. It started one late night, when he couldn't sleep. The stock market had turned against him, his business partners had vanished, and his family, well, they had long since stopped answering his calls. As he walked through the dimly lit halls, he noticed her in the kitchen. Elena, the maid, whispering softly over a cracked teacup, her hands moving gently in the air as if she was weaving something unseen. And then, strangely, the clock on the wall stopped ticking. At first, Alexander thought his tired mind was playing tricks. He'd been under immense pressure, meetings, debts, the slow unraveling of everything he'd built. But that night, something about her calmness felt different, almost out of place. The way the candlelight flickered around her, the way her eyes glowed with quiet sadness, it was as if she carried something far deeper than anyone could guess. The next morning, he found the same teacup on his desk, clean, whole, and shining like new. The problem was, he had seen it broken the night before. Days passed, and he began noticing other strange things. The wilting flowers in the hallway would bloom again after Elena walked by. The old grandfather clock that hadn't worked in years suddenly chimed. And one afternoon, when he caught her humming near the study, the heavy air that usually hung in that room seemed to lift. For the first time in months, Alexander felt something he couldn't name: peace. Still, he told himself it was coincidence. Magic didn't exist, not in his world, not for a man who believed only in logic and numbers. But deep down, something inside him was changing. He started watching her closely, quietly, trying to understand what made her different. And the more he watched, the more he realized that Elena wasn't just another maid. She seemed to know things, like when the phone would ring, when the rain would stop, even when he would wake up from his restless sleep. One evening, he gathered the courage to ask her. "How do you do it?" he said, his voice low, almost breaking. Elena looked up from polishing the silver tray, her eyes deep and unreadable. "Do what, sir?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "You fix things. Things no one else can. Even me?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. The silence between them grew thick, filled with the soft ticking of the same clock that had once stopped. Then she smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile, and whispered, "Sometimes, Mr. Donovan, you have to see before you can believe." That night, Alexander couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't worry that kept him awake. It was curiosity. Because when he walked past the kitchen at midnight, Elena wasn't there. Yet the light was on, the air was warm, and on the table sat another teacup. This one filled with steam and a folded note beside it. His hands trembled as he reached for it, not knowing that what he was about to read would change everything he thought he knew about her and himself. Alexander stared at the note for a long time before daring to unfold it. The handwriting was delicate, almost old-fashioned, the kind you'd see in letters from another time. It read, "What's broken can be mended, but only if the heart believes it still matters." There was no name, no explanation, just that one sentence that struck something deep inside him. He didn't know what it meant, but for some reason, he couldn't throw it away. He kept it in his jacket pocket, close to his heart, as if it carried some kind of unseen warmth. Over the next few days, Alexander began paying closer attention. Not to his failing business, not to the numbers flashing across his laptop screen, but to the small things happening around him. The house that once felt cold and empty now seemed to breathe again. The staff, who had grown distant after his financial troubles, started smiling more. Even his headaches, which had become a daily punishment, started to fade. And always, somewhere in the background, Elena moved quietly, her presence soft but powerful, like a melody that never quite left your mind. He wanted to ask her about the note, but every time he tried, she somehow disappeared before he could speak. It was as if she knew what he was thinking before he even said it. Sometimes, he caught her standing by the old piano in the sitting room, her fingers brushing across the keys, though no sound came out. Once, when he finally asked if she played, she smiled and said softly, Not anymore. That answer stayed with him, echoing like a riddle. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the garden, bending the trees until their branches scratched against the windows. Alexander sat by the fireplace, trying to calm his thoughts, when he saw a flicker of movement near the back of the house. He followed the light and found Elena standing outside in the rain near the old fountain. She wasn't hiding from the storm. She was facing it. Her hands moved slowly through the air, and though the wind roared, the rain around her seemed to fall more gently, almost in rhythm with her breathing. "Are you all right?" he called out, stepping closer, his voice trembling. She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the lightning. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "you have to stand in the storm to remind yourself you're still alive." Then she looked past him toward the mansion and added, "But some storms don't come from the sky, Mr. Donovan. They live in here." She touched her chest lightly and walked away, leaving him standing in the rain, too stunned to move. That night, he couldn't shake her words. There was something about the way she said storms don't come from the sky that felt personal, almost directed at him. He began to wonder if she knew about his past, the mistakes, the deals, the betrayals that had led to his downfall. How could she know, unless she had seen it somehow? He started searching for answers. He asked the other staff about her, but no one seemed to know much. She came from the agency about a year ago. One of them said, "Quiet woman, doesn't talk about herself. Always on time, always polite. We don't even know where she lives." A year ago, that was around the time his troubles had begun. The first lawsuit, the first partner who turned against him. Coincidence, he told himself. But deep down, he wasn't sure. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that Elena hadn't just appeared in his life by chance. The next morning, when he went to find her, she wasn't in the kitchen or the garden or anywhere in the house. On the counter, however, was another note, same handwriting, same paper. It said only one line. "When you finally see what's hidden in plain sight, everything will make sense." Alexander stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hands. The morning light poured through the window, revealing a reflection in the glass, his own face, and behind it, for just a moment, the faint shadow of Elena watching him. Then it was gone. For days, Alexander couldn't focus on anything else. The business meetings he once lived for no longer mattered. The phone calls went unanswered, the emails unread. His mind kept circling back to the mysterious notes, the strange peace that seemed to follow Elena, and the unshakable feeling that she knew something about him, something no one else could possibly know. Every corner of the mansion began to feel alive with her presence, even though she was nowhere to be found. Sometimes he thought he heard her humming in the distance, soft and sad, like a lullaby echoing through the walls. Late one evening, as thunder rolled over the city, Alexander sat alone in his study staring at the flickering fire. His reflection shimmered in the window, and for a moment, he could have sworn he saw someone standing behind him. When he turned, no one was there, but on his desk lay a photograph he didn't remember putting there. It was old, faded, and clearly taken years ago. In it, he was much younger, standing in front of one of his first hotels. But it wasn't the photo of himself that made his heart race. It was the woman standing in the background. She looked exactly like Elena. He picked up the picture with shaking hands. The photo had been taken nearly 15 years ago. It didn't make sense. How could she look the same, unchanged by time? He searched for the original copy in his files, but it wasn't there. The more he looked, the deeper his confusion grew. Was it possible she had been connected to him long before he met her? Or was someone playing tricks on him? The next morning, he called the Maid agency. The line rang and rang before a voice finally answered. When he asked for Elena's records, the woman on the other end fell silent. "Sir," she said finally, "there's no one by that name in our system. Are you sure you have the right person?" Alexander's chest tightened. "She's been working here for a year," he insisted. "Elena, dark hair, quiet voice. You must have her file." "I'm sorry, Mr. Donovan," the woman replied, her tone uneasy. "No one by that name has ever been employed through us." Then the line went dead. He sat in silence for a long time, the weight of her words sinking in. Every trace of Elena, her hiring documents, her contact information, even her signature on the payroll, was gone. It was as if she had never existed. And yet, the faint scent of lavender lingered in the kitchen. The sound of her footsteps still echoed faintly in the hall. That evening, as the sky darkened, Alexander decided to search her quarters. Her room, tucked behind the laundry area, was simple and neat. On the dresser, he found a small wooden box with strange carvings along its sides, symbols he couldn't recognize but somehow felt drawn to. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a young girl standing beside a hospital bed. On the bed lay a man, pale and fragile. Alexander's breath caught when he realized it was him. Years ago, during his first heart surgery, the girl's face was blurred, but her eyes, they looked just like Elena's. He sank into the chair, his mind spinning. How could she have been there? He barely remembered those hospital days, only fragments of faces and voices. Was she real, or had she always been something else, something beyond his understanding? As he sat there, lost in thought, a sudden noise made him jump. The wooden box slipped from his hand and fell open. Beneath the photograph was another folded note. This one was different, older, the paper yellowed and worn. It read, "You once made a promise, even if you've forgotten. I came to remind you." Alexander's pulse raced. What promise? To whom? He tried to recall, but his memory felt foggy, blurred by years of ambition and greed. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows, and for a brief second he heard a whisper in the air, his name spoken softly. He looked toward the door, and there she was, Elena, standing silently in the hallway, her eyes calm but filled with something ancient. "Why are you here?" he whispered. She stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "Because, Mr. Donovan, you once asked to be saved. And now, it's time to remember what that truly means." Before he could respond, the lights flickered and the entire mansion went dark. The power outage swallowed the mansion in total darkness. The only sound was the storm outside, wind howling through the cracks, rain hammering against the windows. Alexander stood frozen, his heart thundering in his chest. The last image burned into his mind was Elena's calm face, her eyes glinting like reflections of candlelight. But now she was gone. He called her name, his voice echoing down the empty corridor, but no one answered. He fumbled for his phone, using its dim light to make his way through the halls. The silence inside the mansion felt heavier than the storm outside. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch him as he passed, their painted eyes glimmering in the flicker of his flashlight. He reached the main hall, where the chandelier swayed slightly above him, creaking with each gust of wind. Something about the air felt charged, like static before lightning. When he reached the kitchen, he stopped cold. The teacup, the same one from before, was sitting on the counter again. Steam rose from it, though the power was still out. Next to it lay a small, folded piece of paper. He picked it up slowly, his hands trembling. The message was simple. The truth lives where the heart broke. Alexander knew instantly what that meant. The study, the room he hadn't entered since the night he lost everything. The night he collapsed from a heart attack while signing away the last of his company's shares. That was the place where everything had begun to fall apart. He took a deep breath and walked toward it, each step echoing against the marble floor. When he opened the door, a rush of cold air swept past him. The fire that had burned earlier was gone, replaced by shadows that seemed to move on their own. In the center of the room stood Elena. She wasn't holding anything, but the air around her shimmered faintly, as if unseen threads of light were swirling around her hands. "You shouldn't be here," Alexander whispered, fear and awe tangled in his voice. Her expression was calm, almost sorrowful. "I told you, Mr. Donovan," she said softly. "You asked to be saved. But saving always comes with remembering." He shook his head, confused. "Remember what? I don't understand." Elena stepped closer. "That night in the hospital, years ago, you were dying. You made a promise. You said if you were given another chance, you'd use it to make things right. But when you recovered, you forgot." Her eyes glimmered, and for a brief second, the air between them seemed to pulse with energy. "You built walls, chased money, and lost yourself in what you feared most, loneliness. Alexander's breath caught. Memories he'd buried long ago began to stir. Fragments of that night in the hospital. The machines, the pain, the voice that told him to hold on. Could have been hers? This isn't possible, he murmured. You can't be? Elena raised her hand, and the air trembled. Sometimes what's real isn't meant to be explained, she said quietly. It's meant to be seen. The lights in the mansion flickered back on, one by one. The chandelier above them glowed brightly, casting long shadows across the walls. But then, just as suddenly, every bulb shattered at once, plunging them back into darkness. The only light now came from Elena herself, soft, faint, like a candle fighting against the storm. Alexander stumbled back, shielding his eyes. "What are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped toward the desk, her fingers brushing the surface where the first note had appeared. "Not what, Mr. Donovan?" she said at last. "Who?" The storm outside grew louder, thunder shaking the ground beneath them. Papers flew off the shelves. The windows rattled, and the air around Elena seemed to hum like electricity. Alexander's pulse raced as he took a step closer, desperate to understand. "If you came to remind me," he said breathlessly, "then tell me, who are you really?" Elena looked up, her eyes filled with both sorrow and light. "I am the promise you made," she said softly, "and the price of forgetting it." Before he could respond, a deafening crack split the air as lightning struck the mansion's grounds. The windows shattered, wind roared through the study, and everything went white. When Alexander opened his eyes, the room was empty. Elena was gone. But on the floor where she had stood was one last note, half burned by the lightning's heat. He picked it up, his hands trembling, trying to make out the faint words still visible on the paper. It said, "You still have one more chance, but only if you can see." Alexander stared at the burned note until the letters blurred. The faint words, "You still have one more chance, but only if you can see," echoed in his mind like a heartbeat he couldn't silence. The storm outside had quieted, but inside the mansion, the silence felt heavier than before, thick, pressing, as though the air itself was waiting. He looked around the study, half expecting Elena to reappear, but the room was empty. Only the faint scent of lavender lingered, soft and haunting. He sank into the chair, exhausted. His hands trembled as he reached for the photograph from the wooden box. The young girl with the same eyes as Elena stared back at him, blurred but familiar. For the first time, he realized something unsettling. The hospital bed in the picture wasn't his. The man lying there wasn't him. It was his father. A chill ran down his spine. His father had died decades ago, long before Elena ever entered his life. But if this photo showed Elena beside his father, how could that be possible? The timeline didn't make sense. He flipped the picture over, and there on the back, scrawled faintly in pencil, was a date, June 1987. Alexander hadn't even taken over the family business yet. He rose to his feet and began searching through old drawers and boxes in the study. He needed to find something, anything, that could connect her to that time. In the bottom drawer, under old ledgers and forgotten papers, he found a letter written by his father. The edges were yellowed with age, but the handwriting was unmistakable. As he unfolded it, his heart pounded harder. "If you ever meet her, don't turn her away. She'll come when you've lost everything, and she'll remind you who you were before the world changed you. Her name is Elena." The paper slipped from his hand. His father had known her. Not only that, he had expected her. But how? The thought sent a wave of unease through him. He felt as though the walls around him were closing in. Just then, a faint creak echoed through the hall. Alexander turned sharply. The lights flickered once more, and from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a figure slipping past the doorway. He followed quickly, his breath unsteady. The corridor seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly ahead. He could hear faint footsteps leading toward the old wine cellar, a place he hadn't visited in years. He descended the stairs, each step colder than the last. The cellar was dimly lit by a single bulb that swung gently from the ceiling. Dust covered every surface, and old bottles lined the walls like silent witnesses. And then he saw it, etched into the brick wall near the far end, a symbol, the same one that had been carved into Elena's wooden box. As he brushed his fingers across it, a low hum filled the air. The wall shifted slightly, revealing a hidden door he had never seen before. He hesitated, his instincts screaming to stop, but curiosity pulled him closer. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, bare except for an old chair and a table. On the table lay another letter and a silver locket. He opened the locket carefully, and his pulse skipped. Inside was a tiny picture of a little boy. It was him, Alexander, at around 6 years old. And beside him was a woman who looked exactly like Elena. He stepped back, disbelief flooding through him. The air grew colder, and the single light bulb above began to flicker violently. Suddenly, a voice, soft, familiar, echoed behind him. "You found it," Elena whispered. Alexander turned, his heart hammering. She was standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come down here," she said quietly. "You've been here before," he said, his voice trembling. "In this house. In my father's time. In my childhood. Who are you, Elena? Tell me the truth." She took a step closer, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "You've lived this life before, Mr. Donovan," she said softly. "And every time you forget, every time you break your promise." He stared at her, confusion and fear twisting inside him. "What are you saying?" Elena looked at the locket, then back at him. "The past isn't gone," she whispered. "It's repeating. And this time, you're running out of chances to change it." Before he could speak again, the walls around them groaned as the light went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Then, from somewhere deep within the mansion, came the faint sound of a clock ticking, slow, deliberate, and counting down. The ticking grew louder with every passing second, echoing through the hidden room like the beating of a giant heart. Alexander's breath came in shallow bursts as he turned toward the sound. The darkness seemed to pulse, thick and alive. He could feel Elena's presence beside him, though he couldn't see her face anymore. The faint scent of lavender returned, mingling with the cold air of the cellar. "Elena," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Tell me what this means. What did I forget? What promise did I break?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, softly, her voice came through the darkness. "The promise wasn't about saving yourself, Mr. Donovan," she said. "It was about saving what mattered most before it slipped away again." A low rumble rolled through the walls, and the ticking grew faster. Alexander stumbled backward as the light bulb above flickered back to life. The hidden room was suddenly filled with a dull, golden glow. On the far wall, a projection shimmered faintly, an image forming from the dust and light. It was a scene from the past. He saw himself as a young man, standing beside his father, shouting in anger. He remembered that day now, the day he'd walked out, swearing never to return, choosing money over family. "I gave up everything for success," he muttered, "and it cost me everything that actually mattered." Elena's voice trembled slightly. "Your father's final wish was for you to remember who you were before the greed took hold. That's why I came. You called me in your weakest moment, years ago, when you thought you were dying. You begged for a second chance to make things right." Alexander's chest tightened. "Then why do I keep forgetting?" "Because you never finish what you start," she said softly. "Each time you remember, you stop halfway. You doubt, you fear, and the world resets. The cycle begins again." He stared at her, his mind spinning. "So this has happened before?" She nodded. "Many times. And every time, you lose me a little more." The light flickered violently, the ticking speeding into a frenzy. Alexander felt a sudden rush of air as the walls seemed to close in. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do," he shouted. "How do I end it?" Elena stepped forward, her eyes glimmering with tears. "You already know," she whispered. "You just have to remember." And then she reached for his hand. The moment their fingers touched, a surge of warmth flooded through him. The room dissolved around them, replaced by flashes of memories. His childhood laughter, his mother's voice, his father's final smile, and Elena standing quietly in the background of it all, watching over them. He remembered now. She wasn't just a maid, not a stranger, not even human in the way he once thought. She was a keeper of the promise, bound to him through time, returning whenever he lost sight of himself. Tears filled his eyes. "I see it now," he whispered. "I remember." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Then this time, maybe it's enough." The ticking slowed one final beat, then stopped. The light dimmed until only her silhouette remained. "Goodbye, Mr. Donovan," she said softly. "Find peace in this life." The next morning, sunlight poured into the mansion. The storm had passed. The house was quiet again, but different, warm, alive. The hidden room was gone, replaced by a solid wall. On the study desk lay the silver locket, polished and open, with a picture of a little boy and the woman who had guided him all along. Alexander sat in silence, holding it in his hands. For the first time in years, his heart felt still, but as he turned the locket over, his breath caught, etched faintly on the back were the words, "See you in the next life." Outside, the old grandfather clock began to tick once more, slow, steady, and hauntingly familiar. Richard sat in silence long after the security footage ended, his hands trembling as he tried to make sense of everything. The rain outside had turned gentle now, tapping softly against the mansion's windows, like the world itself was exhaling after storm. Maya's words replayed in his mind. How she had recognized the loneliness in his son's eyes, how she had taught him to communicate not just with his hands, but with his heart. All the power, all the money, all the walls Richard had built around himself. None of it mattered compared to the love and understanding she had shown his child. When little Oliver woke up the next morning, his first instinct wasn't to look for his father. It was to look for Maya. Richard watched quietly from the hallway as Oliver signed her name. His small hands moved with fluency that made Richard's throat tighten. Maya smiled softly, knelt beside him, and signed back, telling him she wasn't leaving yet. For the first time in years, Richard felt something break open inside him. A realization that maybe he had been too focused on control, too blind to what really made life meaningful. He stepped into the room, his voice low. "Oliver," he said, "can you teach me what she taught you?" The boy's eyes lit up as he nodded eagerly. And in that small moment, the distance between father and son began to fade. The air felt lighter, the silence less cold. Maya watched the two of them with tears in her eyes, knowing this was what she had hoped for all along. Over the next few days, Richard made changes in ways that surprised everyone. He visited the hospital to personally thank the doctors who had helped Oliver. He donated funds to create a program supporting children with hearing loss. And most importantly, he made sure Maya was offered a full scholarship to complete her education in child communication therapy. She tried to refuse at first, insisting she didn't do it for money or recognition, but Richard told her softly, "You gave my son a voice. This is the least I can do." It seemed like the perfect ending, until the envelope arrived. It was addressed to Richard with no return name, just a small wax seal. Inside was a photograph. It showed Maya as a child, standing beside a smiling woman in a nurse's uniform, the same nurse who had once cared for Richard's late wife during her final days. On the back of the photo was a note written in delicate handwriting. "She promised me she would help your son find his words one day." Richard stared at the message, feeling a quiet ache in his chest. He looked up toward the sky through the rain-speckled window and smiled faintly. It was as if fate had kept a promise his wife once made, one carried to the kindness of a stranger who had unknowingly changed their lives forever. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Richard sat beside Oliver and Maya on the garden bench. Oliver signed a simple phrase he had just learned. "Family." Richard repeated it clumsily, earning a giggle from his son. The three of them laughed together, the sound soft and real. For the first time in a long while, Richard didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt like a father, a man given a second chance at love, connection, and purpose. And as the wind whispered to the garden, he realized that sometimes the most powerful language in the world isn't spoken at all, it's felt.